This is CNN Breaking News.
Recently, CNN's Brian Stelter tweeted out the following. Truth is, I hit a wall. Gutted by the death toll, I crawled in bed and cried for our pre-pandemic lives. I think those tears have been waiting a month to escape. The response from Twitter was swift and predictable. It's time to man up, Brian Stelter. Stop being such a little crybaby bitch. Now, I could understand if Brian Stelter lost a loved one or something like that, why he would be really upset. Under those circumstances, maybe it would be reasonable for a grown man to broadcast to the entire internet that they were crying like some sort of little baby. But this isn't what Brian Stelter from CNN is crying over. He's crying out for his pre-pandemic life. He misses the days where he could go to restaurants and go to the movie theater to watch Marvel movies with a big tub of butter popcorn. Poor baby Brian Stelter. All he wants to do is go and see Captain Marvel 2, but the theater's closed because coronavirus. So big boy Brian Stelter tweets back, "Masculinity is fake. It's all performative." It's official, everyone. CNN's round and effeminate news anchor has declared that masculinity isn't real. You see, everyone, CNN's Brian Stelter is a man of the left, which means that he isn't a man at all. The neoliberal left of today has abandoned the concept of masculinity altogether. It's why many prominent men of the left, like Destiny Steve Bonnell, have given up on even the idea that their wife or girlfriend would be faithful to them. Therefore, these men of the left, being men of the highest caliber of intelligence, allow other men to sleep with their wives and girlfriends. You know, because they've got big brains, but not necessarily a big anything else. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, did the grown men of America go out to the street and start crying about how they were going to have to fight in war and how terrible that they couldn't go out and watch movies and go to restaurants anymore? Fuck no. They weren't a bunch of whiny bitches. Here's my advice, Brian Stelter, if you want to live a happier life. You need to search deep inside yourself and try and find some sliver of masculinity that still remains in your large floppy body. Rather than cry and whine all the time, try embracing this last remaining masculinity you have, and maybe you'll learn something. Perhaps you'll find that not only is masculinity real, that it carries real virtues along with it. Things like bravery and stoicism. If you could learn to be more brave, Brian Stelter, then when crises happen, things like the coronavirus, you may be able to handle it better. You won't be so scared inside. You won't be so frightened that you end up crying. It's important for a country that it have brave men because it needs people who are dependable in a crisis, who are willing to face threats. That's why, as far as I know, every human society, with the exception of modern United States, have valued men who are brave. And don't tell me that being brave is performative. Those soldiers that stormed Normandy Beach during World War II, they weren't acting performatively. They were fighting a real war. You tweeting about how you're crying over the coronavirus, that's performative. It's performative because there's no reason you have to let the entire internet know that you were crying by yourself at your house. If you stopped cucking out to your CNN audience for just a few minutes and try to embrace what makes you a man, maybe you could also develop some sort of sense of stoicism. Unlike women, men aren't a bunch of emotional wrecks all the time. Because most men, over time, acquire a sense of wisdom about the world. Men realize that they don't have control over everything that happens. That the only thing that they do have control over is what they do. their own personal character. If I tie my own personal happiness to things that are fleeting, like whether I can eat out at restaurants, whether I get to go out to the movie theater to watch Marvel movies, whether I get a promotion at CNN, and then those things don't happen for whatever reason, then I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be crushed. If instead I learn to embrace stoicism, the masculine virtue, then instead of me caring about these contingent, pointless pleasures, I can instead focus on what really matters, my own character. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Your character is the one thing that the world can never take away from you. So if you're proud of your own individual character, you will always be happy. If all you care about in life is something like how much money you have, well, you're eventually going to reach a point where you're not going to make additional money. And because something like money never leaves you permanently satisfied, it always leaves you wanting more and more of it, then you're going to be miserable. Here's why virtue is the most important thing. A country that invests in its own people and cultivating virtue in its citizens so that it has a highly virtuous population has the greatest asset that any country could have. This is because that no matter what happens to that country, nothing can chip away at that asset. Men of the left, like Brian Stelter or Destiny, only care about money. They think that the most important thing for the United States is for it to have the largest GDP possible. That's all that matters, is your gross domestic product. But what happened when the coronavirus pandemic hit? All of that GDP plummeted. It was gone in an instant. It's like someone snapped and it was just all gone.
We can put that check in a money market mutual fund. Then we'll reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
Now we're left with no money and a population of miserable weaklings like Brian Stelter. If instead of focusing so much on GDP, the United States invested in its people, aimed all of its efforts at making sure the citizenry was more virtuous, then America would emerge from this crisis unscathed. Our greatest asset would remain intact. But instead, the people who are supposed to be leading us, like our major network news anchors like Brian Stelter, are freaking out and crying. One of our nation's greatest accomplishments was landing a man on the moon. In fact, we did several moon trips. We're the only country in the world to have ever accomplished such a feat. America's a richer country now than it was during the 1960s. But we will never land another man on the moon, not unless we change the way our society works. The reason is that we lost our greatest asset as a nation, a population that was virtuous, hardworking, and patriotic. America's population today is cynical, self-absorbed, and greedy. And that's not their fault. It's how our entire economy and society is aligned these days. Masculinity is real. It's exactly what the country needs right now. And for CNN to act like this isn't true just goes to show what everyone already knows. CNN is fake news. They lied about Chris Cuomo staying in his bunker because he had coronavirus. They've been caught several times recently publishing Chinese propaganda. And now they're trying to misinform our men that they aren't men at all. That manliness is a myth. That masculinity is just performative. Just like everything else that CNN reports, that's fake news. Moving on, the second thing I wanted to talk about is the city of Los Angeles. Now, a couple weeks ago, I predicted that there was going to be a major crisis in Los Angeles due to the fact that it has tens of thousands of homeless drug addicts living in the areas around Skid Row. I predicted that once this population started getting infected with the coronavirus, that they would not seek health treatment. Drug addicts who live on the street don't tend to be people who are very interested in going to a hospital where they're not able to shoot up more drugs. These are not the sort of people who, given a government mandate to shelter in place, are going to care about that or are going to follow it. These are the exact opposite of virtuous people. They're self-centered and narcissistic. All they care about is getting high. I predicted this street homeless population would not cooperate with the city of Los Angeles, that coronavirus would tear through this group quickly, and that it would end up infecting first responders having to deal with people deeply ill from the disease. So I have an update for you. Right now, there's been 57 confirmed cases of coronavirus of homeless people on Skid Row. However, those are just confirmed cases. And apparently, as I predicted, the thousands of homeless people living around Skid Row are actively resisting any efforts by the city of Los Angeles to test people or otherwise deal with the issue of coronavirus. To try and figure out how bad the problem is, Los Angeles set up a free testing center in Skid Row. Despite the fact that tens of thousands of people live in the area, so far they've only managed to test 8 people because they're afraid if they test positive, they'll either be taken to a hospital or put in isolation. Being put in isolation means they can't buy drugs. Remember, Los Angeles has homeless shelters. It commandeered hotels to put homeless people in so that they could self-isolate during the coronavirus pandemic. The people who are on the streets in Skid Row are not just regular homeless people. They're homeless people who aren't interested in living in a shelter. The reason for that is that they're drug addicts. A local news journalist from NBC Los Angeles interviewed some of these homeless people and asked them why they weren't wearing masks, why they weren't getting tested. You know what the homeless people told them? It's all fake. Coronavirus isn't real. It's all baloney. You see, this is what happens when you reach peak self-centeredness. When you're so obsessed with just doing whatever you want to do, and someone tells you that some sort of scenario exists where you can't do that anymore, then it just must be all lies. It must be a conspiracy theory. So the brilliant plan being considered by the city of Los Angeles to deal with this problem is to bribe these people to get them tested. They're going to offer them Subway gift cards for a $5 footlong. Because apparently they did this before for people to take vaccines for hepatitis A. If the city of Los Angeles thinks that this is going to be a successful strategy, then they've deluded themselves. A coronavirus test is not equivalent to a vaccine for hepatitis A. If you're a homeless drug addict and you allow the government to give you a vaccine, nothing bad is going to happen to you. There are no consequences. You might as well do it in order to get the free footlong sandwich. However, if you go and let the government test you for coronavirus and you test positive, well, that has implications. You're not going to be able to keep on doing what you're doing, shooting up heroin in your tent on the sidewalk. And most of these homeless people are not going to accept the risk that their routine might have to be altered in order to get a free footlong sandwich from Subway. A footlong sandwich? Are you kidding me? You're telling me that the city of Los Angeles couldn't at least shell out for a Jersey Mike's or a Jimmy John's? You're seriously gonna offer Subway footlong sandwiches. This isn't going to work. Now, I take no pleasure in this, but this is exactly what I predicted would happen. These people wouldn't cooperate with the local government, and the local government's response would be too impotent to deal with the problem. Now, I don't want to have to release another video 2 weeks from now talking about how hundreds of people have died because of this, and that first responders have been severely compromised dealing with this population because they refuse to seek out any sort of health care. I don't want to have to do another video like that. These junkies who live in tents on Skid Row are grown adults, but they act like children. But they're not children. So the city of Los Angeles needs to take off the kid gloves and come up with something a little bit more heavy-handed than pretty please get tested and we'll give you a footlong sandwich. Remember, Los Angeles' local government being impotent and permissive when it came to drug use is what caused this homelessness crisis to begin with. Only an idiot would therefore think that the way that they can solve this problem is through more policies that reflect permissiveness and impotence. Just like Brian Stelter needs to man up, California's local government needs to start doing what it's supposed to be doing. Govern over these people. Demand that they get tested. Deal with the problem. Require these people to get off the street, off of drugs, and work to take care of themselves. The purpose of government is to govern people, not coddle them. The government shouldn't have to bribe its citizens to get tested for coronavirus with footlong sandwiches. Anyways, that's all I have to say on this issue. If you enjoyed this video and you're not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe.